Доброе утро, дамы и господа. I will speak in Russian.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I will speak Russian. When we speak about digitization, we generally speak about the digitization of business processes, government, education. But it is all about the details. So I would like to speak about how the psyche, the psychology changes and how our brain has been changes when we are essentially digitizing humans. Here are the number of problems that I would like to highlight for you. Well, we are obviously comprised of the elements that we consume with the food, and in this sense, we are what we eat. And perhaps the same, exactly the same, can be said about the information that we consume. And please have a look at this picture. This is a picture with congenital iodine deficiency syndrome. Just one chemical element was missing in his development, just iodine. And this is something that he found short in his food consumption. Now, what about the information environment? Have a look at this slide here. We have a great article on neurophysiology on the left-hand side, and a picture of Instagram, a screenshot of Instagram of Kim Kardashian. You know, just take yourself at the thought of what you are looking at. Don't be ashamed, don't be surprised. This is how our psyche works. When we are given a choice of the harder or the simpler task, you choose the simpler task. That is the economics of our brain. It consumes a lot of energy. So the principle of economics, of energy saving, dictates the choice of a simpler task. Hence, the media industries that generate the content really vie for which content is the simplest. So we are observing the escalation of the primitive content, and as we have said, we are the content that we consume. So essentially, we are going through a fundamental transformation. We are migrating from the Gutenberg's galaxy to the Zuckerberg's galaxy. We used to be a civilization of texts and systemic thinking. We are transitioning to the civilization of visual images. No analytical thinking, no systemic thinking in it. How does such structural change of information consumption change our neurophysiology? Over the past couple of years, we have been able to look into the living, working brain, and we identified complete difference in our perception of how it works. You can see here the Professor Marcus Rachel. He told us that the brain works in three basic modes, essentially. This is a very important thing, so please note those modes. If you look at the lower line, this is the actual brain that consumes information. This is the status of your brain right now. I'm giving the information, you're consuming it. This is a central executive network responsible for it. In this central line, you can see the brain that is getting its bearings in the situation. When you walked into this room, you had to find your seat, so you were deploying your salience network. And up above, you see the hot brain, the fiery brain. This is the brain that doesn't think about anything in particular. You know, that really happens to all of us. You know, you are thinking about this and that, you get the question, what are you thinking of? And you are saying nothing in particular. This is the most important mode of operation for your brain, because at this time, your brain is running the various game scenarios. It is thinking systemically, and this is the time when you get the most important insights and solutions. This is the eureka moment. This is the aha moment. We used to think that brain is organized locally. You know, there are zones in the brain that have different functions. The visual cortex, auditory cortex, motion cortex. But things are much more complicated, as we have learned recently. Over the first 25 years of life, our neurons connect with the other neurons in very remote areas of the brain. Those are the neural networks emerging. They are going to be responsible for those three modus operandi. As I've said, it's going to be taking 25 years, because when we are born, the connections in the brain are local. And for us to learn to concentrate, for us to get our bearings in a situation, we take 25 years. I'm showing these mathematical diagrams of connectivity in the brain. Some anatomical zones get the differentiation. On the other hand, those systems get consolidated. You can see that down below. Essentially, what we are doing is we are creating a programmed server that's going to be responsible for the thinking when you become an adult. And a youngster, a youth, is not simply learning about the brain. A youngster is essentially programming the brain, hardwiring the brain. And what is the situation that the current youth is in when they are hard-coding their brain in this hyper-information environment? How does that affect their thinking? The most unpleasant thing is that their default mode system gets suppressed. Ashley Chan, a researcher, showed that the three systems that I'm talking about are antagonistic. One suppresses another. One suppresses the two others, actually. When you activate the salience network and the executive network, the default mode system gets suppressed. Conversely, when the executive network and the salience network are depressed, the default mode system gets activated. And when you consume content continuously, your executive network is continuously active, but that means that there's no energy flowing into your systemic thinking brain area. So essentially your brain goes into hibernation. So we should not be surprised that people who dive out Twitter and into Instagram think in templates. They don't develop. And we are talking about adults here. What about our children? If you look at this data here, they are shocking indeed. About 40% of kids and youngsters in the United States, and in Russia for that matter, before the age of 10 are continuously online, so they consume information. If Kaspersky Lab is to be believed in, the European parents are more conscientious, but by the age of 14, the situation is more or less level, and pretty much everyone in the world, every youth in the world, spends 60 to 70% of their time online. So they put their thinking server into hibernation mode. But this is, this simply doesn't operate. But this is not the only problem. But the other problem is, yet another problem is, Gloria Mark told us, for you to kick your systemic brain into action, it takes 23 minutes. And if you don't give it 23 minutes on average, mind you, you're going to continue living in this other space. And here's another research outcomes, dated 2016, by the way. Back then, an average person spent about 80 sessions on the smartphone a day. That meant every 15 minutes. So essentially, he never gave himself or herself those 23 minutes to kickstart that default mode system and upload the intelligence food into it. Yet this problem is not the last one. The evolution created this default mode system for us to become a social animal. The default mode is the most social of all those systems. But what are we observing right now? In 1997, the amount of screen time was equal to the amount of time that we spent interacting with each other. In 2007, the arrival of iPhone, the screen time was in excess of 8 hours, whereas face-to-face time was under 2 hours, and that trend deteriorated still. So what we have right now is an epidemic of digital autism. The digital autism is this condition whereunder youth, youngsters cannot sustain a long-term psychological contact with each other. They are not interested in the other guy's internal world. Other people are easily replaceable for them because they don't see any value in those relationships. Even during the dates, the people might prefer their smartphones to the FaceTime with the date.
Some might say that this is a new civilization. We just have to put up with it. It's just a new world. But those who think about like this, look at the research of 2018. They used quite a large selection, and the information is very interesting. If you spend more than 2.53 hours using your phone, the the self-injuring behavior and depressive disorders increase dramatically. So the peak of this graph, of this diagram, is the self-injuring behavior and depressive disorders. Some try to remove the depressive thoughts by using the phone, but for the majority of the people, the usage of the phone leads to social anxiety and to other things. And social networks are to blame here. On the next diagram, you see the comparison of people who use phones and who do not use phones. Yes, there are some people who don't do that. This is the Israeli research. On the left part of the diagram, you see the dark columns. These are the symptoms of the symptoms of the ADHD who use the phones, and the white ones, those who do not use the phones. And this is the level of the number of the people who have ADHD. People who did not use smartphones before were asked to use smartphones. During 3 months, they were using smartphones. As a result, the social alertness and anxiety increased, aggression and internal animosity increased too. One of the last things I wanted to tell is the distal vision phenomenon. Our motivation, our goals are explained by the extension to which our brain can look into the future, make forecasts and think about our future. And the result is the following. If the default system is not working, and you can see it here, that means that the distal vision, the ability to look into the future, is lost by a human. So a person cannot be motivated and put goals. And as I have promised before, the cherry on top, that's a very exciting research of Ward and Bass. In 2017, there were 3 groups of students. They made underwent creative and thinking tests, and these were 3 groups, several hundreds of people. The difference was the following. The first group, by filling the tests, they had to put their phones outside of the room where they underwent the test. The second group could put their phones in their bags or in their pockets. The third group had to put the phones in front of them and then complete the tests. Screen down. And actually the physical presence of a phone on the one hand, influence the level of the operating memory, random access memory, and secondly, it influences the fluid intelligence. So small column, that's the phone on the desk. Large column is when the phone is in another room. So the working memory capacity increases and the fluid intelligence capacity increases. So when the phone is outside of the room, and when you have a phone, you're becoming more silly. So this is one of the 4 basic points, basic ideas that we faced. There is a change of the consumption of the information, and that leads to the fact that we do not only see the gap between the rich and the poor, but we see the gap between the clever and the silly. At the same time, we see the changes in terms of the structure of social communication and interaction. There is no vertical system of management, and there is a movement to the horizontal society. That means that we lose biological skills and capacity for our cognitive side, and that means that the educational process is impeded. The third idea is that the change of communication leads to digital autism, leads to lower emotional intelligence, and to increased level of digital addiction. The last thing is that this commitment to hedonism and lack of ability to think about the future leads to the fact that people become non-tolerant to their failures and mistakes. They want to achieve easy success, and as we understand, it would not work good for the economy, for the civilization, and for the communities. So, can we give the cognitive functions to the machines? That's the question asked by Daniel Dennett. He is one of the best philosophers now, and he says yes, if we manage to prevent the atrophy of our own cognitive skills. And it is the major problem right now. Now, what can we do with that? I'm a psychiatrist. So let's look at 3 networks of the brain. In 2007, Norman Farr showed that meditation and mindfulness help to improve the salience network working that is responsible for the switching between the default mode network and the central executive network. The executive network improves its work, improves our thinking abilities if you use digital hygiene rules that should become a norm, and your default system, responsible for thinking, it should work better. For that, you have to improve your social communication, social interactions, and improve their quality. Other speakers will talk about that too, and I would like to thank you for the attention on that. Thank you very much.
I would like to say thank you very much to Mr. Andrey Kurpatov, and I would like to excuse myself because we created such an unfriendly environment with the time pressure.